This is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. The presenter is a student at UAMS, not a representative of the agency named in the following slides. The information contained herein does not necessarily reflect the views of said agency. Hello, citizens of Little Rock. My name is Dr. Katie Lohr, and I work for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, as an environmental health specialist. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at your city's annual Improving Our Community and Beyond. Today, I'll be talking about car emissions. At the end of this presentation, you should be able to define car emissions, how it affects environmental health and human health, what regulations are currently in place, and what recommendations EPA has for reducing car emissions. According to the EPA, emissions are a byproduct of a moving motor vehicle. A car engine regularly releases a number of gases and particles into the environment. These include evaporative emissions, which occur when vapors of fuel are released into the atmosphere without being burnt, and exhaust emissions. Emissions include volatile organic compounds, as well as carcinogens, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and solid particles like soot and metal. Several pollutants in vehicle exhaust can cause widespread problems such as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxide. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, colorless, and poisonous gas. It reduces oxygen flow in the bloodstream and may be dangerous to those at risk for heart disease. Carbon dioxide is considered a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. According to EPA, 1 gallon of gasoline creates 18 pounds of CO2. Hydrocarbons are toxic and may be responsible for some cancers. It is released through the evaporative emissions as well as running losses, hot soak, and refueling. Nitrogen oxide causes the formation of acid rain. Reported from EPA, greenhouse gas emissions from transportation account for about 28% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, making it the country's largest contributor. 61% of car emissions in the U.S. are produced by light-duty vehicles. 18% are from freight trucks and buses, 10% from aircrafts, 4% from ships, 2% from the military, 2% from rails, and 3% from the miscellaneous transportation options such as motorbikes. Furthermore, there are many Americans that live in rural communities. The Natural Resources Defense Council conducted a survey and found that the majority of rural and small-town citizens in every state are displeased with their current transportation system and would assign it a grade of C or lower. Rural areas also face unique transportation problems. Rural residents must drive further distances to get to work, school, shopping, and services, leading to higher transportation expenses that stretch household budgets and prevent many residents from accessing economic opportunities and health care. With aging rural populations, inadequate public transit threatens to isolate growing numbers of elderly and disabled residents. The environment is the most concerning factor in the regulation of car emissions. Here are the effects on environmental health. Compromised air quality. Vehicle emissions directly affect air quality with more cars traveling longer distances. Fortunately, as vehicle regulation has increased, motor vehicle emissions are decreasing. Air pollution from older, unmaintained vehicles can cause dire health consequences, including allergic and respiratory disorders, lung conditions, and increased risk of cancer. Depleted ozone layer. Vehicle emissions affect the ozone layer. The ozone layer is found in the upper atmosphere and protects life on Earth by shielding the planet from UV radiation produced by the sun. When the ozone layer is compromised, the effects of UV radiation are more apparent, including genetic damage, immune system deficiency, skin cancer, and decreased agricultural productivity. expend valuable natural resources. The manufacturing, operation, and maintenance of vehicles alone have an environmental impact. This process utilizes valuable non-renewable resources, including metals, petroleum, and other fossil fuels. These resources in our environment are limited and should be used sparingly. Release greenhouse gases. We've already confirmed that vehicle emissions produce greenhouse gases that support climate change. As greenhouse gases increase in the atmosphere, they trap heat released from the surface of the Earth. Excess greenhouse gases released by vehicle emissions increase the temperature of the Earth and affect global climates, including rainfall and temperature. Decrease water quality. Vehicle use and emissions also affect water quality as byproducts like oil and particles are washed into our nation's water supply. According to Yale University, vehicles are America's biggest air quality compromisers, producing about 1/3 of all U.S. air pollution. The smog, carbon monoxide, and other toxins emitted by vehicles are especially troubling because they leave tailpipes at street level, where humans breathe the polluted air directly into their lungs, as stated by the National Geographic. High air pollution increases respiratory and cardiovascular hospital admissions and mortality. High or continued exposures will reduce life expectancy. Some short-term effects are exacerbation of asthma, coughing, wheezing, and shortness of breath. Long-term effects from high or continued exposure can lead to stroke, lung cancer, respiratory conditions, and cardiovascular disease. Over 40 years of clean air policies have improved air quality and improved the health of Americans and the environment. Since 1970, EPA has set and implemented emission standards to control pollution. These standards are a critical part of the progress and improved air quality we have achieved despite increased economic activity and more miles traveled on average per person. Listed here are car emission regulations to help mitigate the negative environmental and public health impacts that these emissions cause. The Clean Air Act of 1970. Congress passed the landmark Clean Air Act in 1970 and gave the newly formed EPA the legal authority to regulate pollution from cars and other forms of transportation. EPA and the state of California have led the national effort to reduce vehicle pollution by adopting increasingly stringent standards. Fortunately, the Clean Air Act has served its purpose to actually improve air quality. Because of this legislation, lead emissions from vehicles have been almost entirely eliminated after leaded gasoline was phased out. Vehicle emissions tests. EPA and automobile manufacturers measure vehicle fuel economy and CO2 emissions using a set of standardized laboratory tests. These tests were designed by EPA to mimic typical driving patterns. EPA and the Department of Transportation use these values to ensure the manufacturers meet federal greenhouse gas and corporate average fuel economy standards. Renewable Fuel Standard. This program was created by Congress in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and expand the nation's renewable fuel sector while reducing reliance on imported oil. Renewable fuels are produced from plants, crops, and other biomass. It can reduce greenhouse gas emissions when compared to burning the fossil fuels they replace. Green Vehicle Guide. Since the mid-1970s, EPA has required automakers to display a label on new cars and light trucks with information on vehicles' fuel economy and fuel costs. Labels on today's cars also include ratings on greenhouse gas and smog-forming pollutants. EPA provides online resources such as the Green Vehicle Guide to help consumers identify vehicles that can save them money at the pump and reduce their transportation-related emissions. Compared to 1970 vehicle models, new cars, SUVs, and pickup trucks are roughly 99% cleaner for common pollutants. New heavy-duty trucks and buses are roughly 99% cleaner than 1970 models. Raising awareness is the first and most important step to protect the environment and preserve our natural resources. Here are some recommendations for reducing car emissions by the EPA. Drive less. Fewer miles driven means fewer emissions. For example, walking, biking, or taking public transportation when you can, and using bike sharing programs if your city has them. Drive wise. The way we drive can reduce emissions from our vehicles. For example, maintain your car, get regular tune-ups, follow the manufacturer's maintenance schedule, and use the recommended motor oil. Choose fuel-efficient vehicles. When shopping for a new car, look for a fuel-efficient vehicle with low greenhouse gas emissions. Lastly, don't idle. Idling pollutes the air, wastes fuel, and causes excess engine wear. Most vehicles use conventional options of fuel such as gasoline and diesel. According to the EPA, there are over 10,000 alternative fueling stations in the United States today. Many alternative fuels burn cleaner than gasoline or diesel, so there are fewer tailpipe emissions. The amount of greenhouse gases emitted when the fuel is produced depends on the source of the fuel. EPA's Green Vehicle Guide is a great resource to learn more about fuel-efficient and alternative green vehicle options. It will help you find information on vehicles that are more efficient and less polluting. The alternative fuel options are listed. Electricity. It can be produced from coal, natural gas, and oil, nuclear, hydropower, solar, wind, and biomass. You can refuel at home by plugging the car into a household outlet to recharge the battery. Hydrogen. It can be produced from natural gas, water, coal, waste, and biomass. Similar to filling your gasoline tank, you attach the nozzle from a designated hydrogen dispenser at a public station. Compressed natural gas. It can be produced from natural gas and waste. Also, like hydrogen, you can refill your gasoline tank at a public station. Ethanol. It can be produced from cereal grains, sugar crops, cellulose from waste or residues, cellulose from energy crops, and cellulose from woody biomass. Cellulose is a molecule consisting of hundreds and sometimes even thousands of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Ethanol is a liquid fuel that is dispensed just like gasoline. Biodiesel. It can be produced from oilseed crops, oil from waste greases or tallow, and oil from algae. Biodiesel is dispensed just like gasoline as well. Every choice makes a difference. By making simple changes to your driving preferences and habits, you can clean up our air and water supply and preserve natural resources. Here is a diagram that illustrates how much CO2 per pound per passenger mile is released depending on which vehicle choice you make. The information shared today is from the EPA, National Geographic, Natural Resources Defense Council, and Yale University. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.